watching Force 13's live streaming service.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our stream for a tropical weather bulletin on October the 4th as of 0 UTC. So, quite exciting stuff here as we do move on here to a new day on the calendar, October 4th, and we're seeing a quite active northern hemisphere in the tropics right now. With me I have Ethan and Ryan here to discuss the tropics with me this evening. And tonight we're going to be opening up with a tropical weather bulletin made by Ethan, a tropical weather outlook. So this is a worldwide outlook of what's going on in the world of tropics. Ethan, what's going on here?
Well, we got a huge plethora of systems right now, going from left to right. We have Major Hurricane Marie, which is weakening from its amazing Category 4 peak. We gave it 140 miles per hour at peak last night, and it has now weakened down to our analysis of 120 miles per hour. That may be a little bit generous, though, looking on satellite imagery. It could be weakening rather rapidly, and we do forecast it to only be a strong tropical storm around 60 miles per hour from this time and around 48 hours from now. But looking off further towards the east, we could be seeing two tropical cyclones develop in the eastern Pacific. The left area of interest, we are giving 30%. The National Hurricane Center, shockingly, have just upgraded that to 50%. And we are also giving the other area of interest 40%. National Hurricane Center giving that 20%. So the eastern Pacific remains quite busy, I hear.
Yeah, the Eastern Pacific does continue to be busy. Surprisingly busy. We're seeing lots of models indicating lots of new tropical cyclones in the Eastern Pacific over the next couple of weeks. Activity really going to start to ramp up, it appears, in the Eastern Pacific here in the next couple of weeks. So, yeah, it looks like we have an active Atlantic as well. What's going on there in the southern Indian Ocean, Ethan?
That is a area of interest that could develop into a brief tropical cyclone. I know that the GFS in particular was hinting at that happening. I'm not sure if it's doing that anymore, but just for continuity's sake with Nathan's tropical weather bulletins, we've decided to mark it down here at 20%. So that's why that is there. And over in the Western Pacific, we have a little Invest 90W. The Euro and GFS showing remarkable agreement that this will become a typhoon and will track north of Taiwan, barely north of Taiwan, and move into the coast of China. I know in earlier runs, the GFS was taking it into the South China Sea and taking it into Hainan Island a little bit. So that is a possible solution. Lots of scenarios are possible with this system, and it does indeed bear watching. Now, getting on over into the Atlantic, we have Gamma moving over the Yucatan Peninsula, dropping heavy amounts of rainfall. I know that we've been receiving a lot of rainfall reports from the areas affected by Gamma today. We have estimated that it is down to 60 miles per hour, along with the National Hurricane Center, and a pressure of 990 millibars. Made landfall around, 6 hours ago or so, with winds of 70 miles per hour, almost a hurricane, believe it or not. It did look pretty good, and it might have even attained hurricane status over land, I hear that some people are discussing about.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what the evidence is for that. Its satellite appearance did maintain itself for a while as it moved over land. Let's move on from this tropical weather outlook, and we're going to have to see what else here exactly goes on. So we'll start with the Climate Prediction Center, which has some interesting worldwide thoughts as well, with them saying that Genesis is possible 2 weeks out in the South China Sea for a tropical cyclone, and they do denote what you guys note as well, which is that southern Indian Ocean possibility of development not only this week, but also next week.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would go into next week with that, because if it does become a tropical cyclone, it's probably going to be short-lived. And I recall it was either in 2018 or 2019, we had an early Southwest Indian Ocean storm in September or October. I'm not sure where that was. It was in my oddly enough, it was in my Facebook memories a few days ago, so that's how I remember it. But that's potentially an analog to look for that system.
Certainly. They do also note that Western Pacific development this week. And then, yeah, I think we're definitely going to see some development out of that system that you were talking about in the Western Pacific. Let's dive into the Atlantic a little more. This is the National Hurricane Center's current outlook map. You can see there the remnants of Paulette still traceable. It's disturbance 3, only has a 10% chance of development. I would expect it to really broaden out into a remnant low, basically dissipate completely within the next few days. We'll take a deep dive into what the models are saying later on in the stream. We have disturbance 2, a 20% chance of formation of that within the next 5 days. This system is expected really to move out to sea. I don't expect it to impact much land, even if it were to develop, which at this point seems relatively unlikely, but there is, again, some model support later down the line. We'll talk about that when we get into a deep dive on the models. And finally, we do have Disturbance 1, which is Invest 92L, now a 70% chance of development within the next 5 days, and a 40% chance of development within the next 2 days. And again, there are some really interesting model solutions for that as well. And again, we'll be taking a deep dive into that here soon. Obviously, the main focus of the night is Gamma, and as we take a look at the wide shot of the Atlantic Ocean, you can see a very noticeable feature that Gamma is, and you can see that kind of train of precipitation heading up through the Carolinas and Florida as well, all attached to Gamma. So, to the team, to Ethan and Ryan, what are your thoughts on the Atlantic right now? We still have Paulette traceable, and we have these two areas of possible development within the next few days, as well as Gamma. What's our thoughts on all of it?
Well, activity has been ramping up again after about a week break at the end of September, but now we are heading into October, past the climatological peak of the season, but of course, hurricane season is not over until November 30th, so we still have a couple months left to watch for any, hurricanes and whatnot.
Yeah, we do have a question in chat talking about whether this could re-strengthen into a hurricane. Definitely a possibility. Again, we'll be taking a deep dive into the future of Gamma and the future of a lot of these storms a little bit later on in the stream. I want to take a closer look at 92L real quick, but you can see it right here on the screen as that imagery does load. And what are our thoughts on 92L? That convection has really waned around where your center, you would expect your center to be at this time. So what are we thinking about 92L at this time?
Well, it's quite an interesting situation when it comes to 92L in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll get to that here in a moment. But talking about 92L, it's really just beginning its tropical cyclone genesis at this time. It's going to be a really long duration period. And, the National Hurricane Center gives that this system could form anywhere from south of Jamaica all the way up to the Gulf of Mexico. And I know, was it the GFS or the GFS pair? I'm not sure which one it was, but it was saying that the system would become a tropical storm near Jamaica. So that is a solution that is possible, though at this time I wouldn't say that's really likely due to upper level winds and unfavorable conditions currently around the system right now. But once the system gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it's quite an interesting situation because Gamma is also going to be in the Gulf of Mexico, meaning that 2020 will once again have two tropical cyclones probably in the Gulf of Mexico at the same time. The other time will be Laura and Marco.
Laura and Marco weren't actually in the Gulf at the same time. They were very close to each other, or they were in the Gulf within like a day of each other, I think. So yeah, it'd be very close. They were very close, but yeah, this would be the first time this year that there were two tropical cyclones in the Gulf at the same time, which is a pretty rare occurrence.
It is a rare occurrence.
But regarding these two systems, it's really a question of which one becomes the dominant feature, because if Gamma can become large enough and become the dominant storm of the Gulf of Mexico, then 92L is really going to struggle because it's going to be dealing with Gamma's influence, and that's going to hinder 92L a lot, and that's really what we honestly want to see. While that would mean lots of more rainfall leading outwards from the storm, Gamma, that is, a little bit more, it would mean that 92L wouldn't be able to develop and take advantage of the ripe conditions that it's going to be in. However, if 92L becomes the dominant feature and Gamma stays far enough towards the south, like the National Hurricane Center is forecasting, then we could be looking at a tropical storm or even a hurricane making landfall somewhere along the U.S. Gulf Coast. So anything's really possible with these two systems once they move into the Gulf of Mexico. Though the one main thing that is important to note with Gamma, over the next few days, it's going to be very, and I repeat, very slow moving. Sometimes even stationary at times, I'd probably bet.
Yeah, Gamma's going to be moving quite slowly. We can actually see the ensemble models. I just want to take a brief look at for 92L, and then we'll dive right into Gamma. But you can see here, 92L has a quite wide ensemble spread. And again, it looks like the question is, like Ethan said, which of these will become the dominant feature? Now, if Gamma nearly dissipates, which is now unlikely, it looks like we will have a farther south storm, especially if 92L develops later. If it develops sooner, which is possible, and Gamma is a stronger storm, we'll see a farther north track. And again, we could see a threat to the Gulf Coast from 92L, which at the least would probably bring some heavy rain. Diving into Gamma, here's its satellite imagery, and to the team, what are we thinking? Its imagery is showing its presentation not quite as good as it was, but that convection, that those minus 70s are fanning out significantly, and it's nearly re-emerged over the Gulf of Mexico, looking almost as good as it did at landfall. Not quite as good, but almost there. It's kind of surprising how little the storm has weakened. So, what are we thinking that means? What kinds of implications could we see?
Well, I mean, considering that Gamma hasn't lost as much strength as we thought it was going to be, or as we thought it was going to over the Yucatan, that would definitely mean that we will be looking at a stronger system in the Gulf of Mexico than what was previously expected. That's going to be the main implication more than anything else.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that. We'll probably see a stronger Gamma than we initially anticipated re-emerging over the Gulf. Some key messages with Gamma, regardless of strength really, it's going to be producing heavy rainfall. This is all according to the National Hurricane Center. And they are claiming for several days we will have rainfall over portions of southeastern Mexico. This could result in catastrophic damage. This rainfall could result in life-threatening flash flooding and mudslides, particularly in the mountainous regions of southeastern Mexico and Central America. They're saying that even though Gamma's moved inland, tropical storm conditions will continue along the east coast of the Yucatan Peninsula through the evening and are expected to spread along the north coast within the tropical storm warning areas tonight and on Sunday. So tropical storm force winds are possible. And something else to notice on that tropical storm force wind probability graphic, there's some parts of the Yucatan that could be within tropical storm force winds for, again, multiple days. So dangerous situation unfolding there. Let's get into more information on those hazards. These graphics made courtesy of Ethan. Heavy rainfall. We have heavy rainfall due to the passage of tropical cyclones producing extensive flooding. That's always a possibility. And again, in this case, it could be catastrophic. Floods can lead to additional floods downstream as well, and the heavy rainfall can persist well inland. It's one of the biggest threats of tropical cyclones. What about storm surge? Well, while extreme winds are a possibility with a lot of storms, we're going to have some storm surge, especially with a storm like Gamma. Not too much, it's not going to be too high, but those winds have ramped up to 70-75 miles per hour, so you could see up to around 2 to 4 feet of surge compared to normal. And again, destructive winds are always a possibility. And again, 70 miles per hour, while that's not a hurricane, it's still no joke. So now let's move on to the Eastern Pacific here for a little bit. We do have to talk about the entire world here. In the Eastern Pacific, we have Marie, which is weakening with time, but we also have a new disturbance that's been tagged with an X now on it. It was a disturbance without the X. Now it has an X, and not only that, it's got a 50% chance of development within the next 5 days. To the team, what are your thoughts on this sudden increase? I believe it was at 30% in just the last outlook.
Yep, indeed it was. And, that system could ultimately develop into a tropical cyclone. And it's really a curious situation what's going to happen between these two East Pacific systems and Gamma. Because if the Western system becomes strong enough, then it might sort of do a Fujiwara effect and absorb the system to its east. Now, with that system to the east, if that becomes big enough, its outflow might weaken Gamma, which and therefore would make 92L stronger. So, it just shows that Eastern Pacific activity can indeed influence the Atlantic activity, and we could be seeing that over the next few days.
Certainly could, and we'll be diving into how that's going to happen here later in the stream, some of the more technical elements of this. But again, we have that 50% chance disturbance, and another 20% chance disturbance, and models have been on board basically flip-flopping between which of the two of these are going to develop, which I think is why the NHC's been sticking with a low chance, but models have become more keen on this western system, and I think that's why the NHCs began to increase their chances. Nothing above 50% right now, though, because there still is some uncertainty as to which of these two will be dominant, and there's even a possibility that they both develop.
Yep. Currently on my screen, I do have the GFS run pulled up for the Eastern Pacific, as well as the Gulf of Mexico. So we'll be able to see every single system that we're watching here, mainly on this model run here. So obviously you can see Gamma in the Atlantic and Marie on the way out in the Eastern Pacific. Marie, not a threat to land. We shouldn't need to worry about that anymore. It was a beautiful hurricane at peak, but its story is coming to a close, unfortunately. Regarding Gamma and these two East Pacific area of interest, as well as 92L, this is what the GFS model is saying for this. In around 72 hours from now, that's probably a tropical depression or a tropical storm out of this western area of interest. Will this verify? Has yet to be seen, but this is a model forecast, and this shouldn't be taken as an accurate representation. You use models to build your forecast off of that. So that's what we do in the tropical cyclone forecasting, and right there, I'm not sure about you, Thomas, but that appears to be a tropical cyclone out of 92L in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, it definitely could be a tropical cyclone in the Gulf of Mexico. It's definitely a more organized system. Could be a tropical depression for sure, and you can see as you continue to run through that model solution, the possibility of both of them being in there at the same time, and Gamma's remnants persisting for a while. There's been a lot of uncertainty with Gamma's future. This particular model run dissipating it. There have been some, especially within the last day or two, that have really strengthened Gamma after it moved southward. So we're going to have to see what happens there. We're going to now take a little bit of a look. Oh, go on.
Just a little interesting note that I just looked here on the GFS run. You can see this eastern system at the National Hurricane Center marked as a tropical cyclone. And if we go down a little bit in the period, you'll see it dissipates, probably due to the higher upper level winds that also will reduce Gamma. And then some of its energy does move parallel to the coast of Mexico and eventually contributes to the formation of a new tropical cyclone, long range on the GFS. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to that. Will this get the same name that system does? Probably not, because, it's energy, it's not the actual circulation, but it's possible to see that system redevelop into a tropical cyclone. And I know that the GFS has been very persistent long range on this system redeveloping, so, but let me say, it does bear watching.
Yeah, certainly. Let's now take a look at a wide shot of the Eastern Pacific where we can see what exactly is going on here. We can see relatively clearly these areas of convection there near Mexico and south of Mexico that could develop into something. We see a little bit of a spin with this 50% area of interest. Definitely something to note. I think that they'd have to tag that as an invest sooner rather than later. And again, you can see that kind of spin there. I'm almost thinking, just by looking closely at that we're seeing the southern and northern. I mean, I'm going to want to look at some ASCAP passes for that when those come out, that's for sure. When it comes to Marie, you can see Marie here out in the Eastern Pacific. Outflow is looking good. You can see that there. You can see some inflow, but dry air. We can see the swath of dry air moving into Marie, intruding into it. Sea surface temperatures are starting to decline, and as Ethan said, Marie's story is beginning to come to a close. Well, let's take a look at Marie's cone real quick. Oh, go on.
Yep. As you're pulling up Marie's cone there, in addition to the dry air that is beginning to entrain into the storm, sea surface temperatures are going to rapidly, and I mean rapidly, decrease over the next few hours, and it'll probably be gone by the time we get to Thursday, I'd imagine. So, Marie, once a beautiful hurricane at peak, and now its story is coming to a close, as we've been saying here. But
Yeah.
this is the normal East Pacific tropical cyclone, I'd say. You have where it intensifies into quite a strong storm as it pushes out to sea, and then sea surface temperatures decline and it weakens and dies out to sea. Luckily, we like to see systems like this that are out to sea, and we hope to see more of those in the Atlantic pretty soon.
Yeah, we hope to see them all remain out to sea. Unfortunately, it looks like 92L and Gamma, both significant rainmakers for land. It looks like they will both be impacting land in some way. If we take a look at Marie's infrared real quick, which you can see on here, that eye has collapsed. You can see shear beginning to increase there, pushing all of that convection to the northeast. And we can see that, again, that eye wall maintaining itself, but I don't know how long that's going to last as it moves northward. So we'll have to see what exactly happens there. We're going to move on now and take a look at, Ethan, a cone that you made for Marie just a few hours ago. So explain to us what was the process of making this, and do we feel like this is going to verify?
Personally, I followed exactly T to T the National Hurricane Center's forecast. So this is their forecast. But I do personally feel like if I were to make this cone right now, I would forecast dissipation to be slightly earlier, probably a day or so earlier, due to the fact that sea surface temperatures and unfavorable conditions will probably get to the storm a little bit more earlier than what the National Hurricane Center is forecasting. So, Marie on its way out, it's still pretty slow moving, only northwest at 9 miles per hour currently. So that movement speed will probably continue over the next few days as it moves into unfavorable conditions. So the slow movement of the system may help it weaken rather slowly initially, but once those sea surface temperatures really drop off a cliff, then I expect that Marie's convection will be all but gone, probably going into next week.
Yeah, it's what it's looking like. Let's move on now to the Western Pacific, where the Joint Typhoon Warning Center has marked Invest 90W now with a low chance of formation. So, how are we feeling about this invest in the Western Pacific? And which land areas should be concerned?
Well, I do know that some of the models are indicating that I believe it's that same system to move sort of west northwestward, possibly towards the Ryukyu Islands in Taiwan. I'm not sure exactly, what they can expect at this point. I don't even know if it's going to form. So I don't know. Well, it's just something to keep an eye on at the moment. No, I wouldn't ring any alarms just quite yet, though.
I've got the model runs pulled up on my screen right now for the Western Pacific, and we can watch 90W here. You can see it quite clearly to the west of the Mariana Islands. 1,003 millibars analyzed on the GFS forecasted in pretty much now, I'd assume, because this is forecast right now, but obviously this probably hasn't verified. Probably pressure is probably a little bit higher. But getting into the run itself, the GFS stalls 90W as it develops probably into a tropical cyclone. Interestingly enough, it has a weak little feature that moves off towards the northeast. That might be a short-lived system, and then 90W becomes the dominant feature, and it moves off towards the west. Interestingly enough, GFS is now pushing it southward a little bit. It was agreeing with the European run. It would take it north of Taiwan, I saw in a few earlier runs, but now it is trending farther towards the south. And in this run, the GFS makes it look like that it's probably going to become a strong typhoon. 940 millibars in pressures right there. I believe that would be a Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale.
Yeah, that would be a really impressive typhoon. And again, we are getting into the longer range with this. There's a lot of uncertainty beyond the 120-hour point here. So, we do have to take with a grain of salt anything much beyond that. But definitely a situation that anywhere from the Ryukyu Islands to China to Taiwan to the Philippines, all those areas are going to have to be watching this over the next week or so. And now it looks like you're taking a look at the euro.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the European model just for comparison, and you can see the broad area of low pressure here. This is 90W here, and you can see the European does develop into a tropical cyclone, blatantly a tropical cyclone, and it does indeed push it off towards north of Taiwan, as I've been saying. GFS in earlier runs was saying this was possible, but it looks like the general westward movement is possible. And I do also note there is a Bay of Bengal cyclone there in around 168 hours on the Euro. So I wonder if that is something that we need to watch out for.
Yeah, it's about a week out, so we'll have to see. But yeah, we'll be keeping a close eye on that with time. So definitely something to keep an eye on for sure. Let's take a look at the wide shot of the Western Pacific now, and you can see, first of all, 90W looking impressive here. Looking quite impressive. You can see a little bit of a difference in direction when it comes to the movement of clouds. Definitely wouldn't call this a TD or anything of that sort, but definitely a elongated area of low pressure for sure. We have another interesting feature over here that could, that's something that I'll be watching. Don't expect that to develop into anything, but again, that's another interesting feature. And I think that 90W's interaction with what looks to be a trough is probably going to be what determines whether it moves southward or it moves into Taiwan. When does it develop and how does it interact with this trough? So, looks like a steering setup that could lead to quite a bit of uncertainty. That's for sure. And to kind of emphasize the uncertainty of this is what the ensembles show for 90W. To Ryan and Ethan here, what's your reaction to the 18Z GEFS ensembles, which take this anywhere from all the way out to sea, paralleling the Japanese coast, to taking the westward turn and heading towards Taiwan? What do we think?
Oh,
Well,
it's very interesting to see that just like some models just turn right or turn left, basically.
what my guess is happening with those statistical runs there is the ones going out to sea are latching on to that separate area of low pressure that I showed that the GFS kind of spurs off of 90W and moves out towards the northeast. I Those are probably what they are catching on to and following that out to sea instead of the main disturbance. So, that's something that needs to bear watching and could bring some rough conditions to the coastlines of Japan as it moves off towards the north and east.
We'll certainly see. The European model didn't actually have that feature of two pressure minimums. So it could be that some of these ensembles have this consolidation move out to sea with the trough, while the GFS main had the trough split the system down the middle and then take a less dominant system out to sea and the more dominant system towards Taiwan and the Ryukyu Islands. So it's a complicated steering setup, but it's definitely something I think to watch for sure.
Currently on my screen, I've got the multi-models up for Hurricane Marie. Looking at the intensity chart, a general rapid weakening phase is forecast by the models over the next few hours. As usual, the GFS is running a little bit lower, saying that this is a Category 2, low-end Category 2 at this time. Obviously, it's not, but, that's quite average of the GFS to do that. And as you can see, shear is supposed to absolutely skyrocket over the next day or so as the system moves off towards the northwest. And that'll probably remove the storm of a lot of its convection. And sea surface temperatures are dropping, and relative humidity is also dropping as well. And this will induce a weakening phase on the storm.
Very rapid.
Moving over to Gamma here. Most models, actually every single model except the GFS, does keep this as a tropical storm throughout the whole 5-day period by the looks of it. And some people were rumbling this could re-intensify to a hurricane. Personally, I would rule that out, and because shear is forecast to be quite high. I remember during Hurricane Marco that the National Hurricane Center was forecasting it to be a hurricane all the way up to Louisiana, and I just wasn't buying it because shear was going to be high. And turns out that my hunch was right with Marco, and I have a feeling that it's going to be right with Gamma here.
Yeah, we'll see. Gamma's a very tight storm. It's a very consolidated storm. It's going to be very capable of taking advantage of that lull in shear that you have there to intensify much more quickly than the models anticipate, but also it's probably going to be affected more significantly by 20 to 30 knots of shear than a larger tropical cyclone. So both of those things have to be acknowledged. When conditions are marginally favorable, storms like this are going to take advantage of that. When conditions are marginally unfavorable, storms like this are going to struggle, while larger storms need a significant shift in one direction or the other in order to really have a significant change in how it's going to be strengthening or weakening. Alright, with that being said, yeah, let's go on to a bigger satellite view of Gamma real quick. I think that this infrared satellite view is interesting. I just want to go over a couple of things. It's relatively clear we do have a frontal boundary that's moving on through in the United States right now. It's probably going to interact with this, basically this train of moisture from Gamma, and what we're probably going to see is, and this is what the models predict, a stalling trend. This frontal boundary is going to move over. You're going to have basically this lid on northward movement before it gets shoved southward, is the anticipation by the models. So that's definitely going to be interesting. But we can see there convective bursts near Cuba and near Florida. It looks like along these coastlines where you get this difference in temperature from the water to land, we could definitely see some flooding in Florida. We could definitely see some in Cuba as well as a result of convection that's going to be firing along the coastline. So it's definitely something to acknowledge as well. And again, with Gamma nearly re-emerging over the Gulf of Mexico, still looking strong. I'm pretty concerned about what it could do once it gets there.
It really just honestly depends on if the storm just slams on the brakes or not, which it probably will, and that'll probably lead to some upwelling, I'd imagine. And this might re-intensify slightly, maybe up to 70 miles per hour, maybe even getting up towards minimal hurricane briefly. But once that wind shear kicks in, as I was showing earlier, then the system is really going to get sheared apart. And I imagine that the convection will be displaced from the center, and the center may be exposed a little bit. Or maybe, dry air and trains and do it like what Chantal was when it was moving northward toward the Gulf Coast. So anything's really possible with this storm as it stalls and meanders across the southern and southwestern parts of the Gulf of Mexico and into the Bay of Campeche over the better part of a week, probably.
Yeah, I still think it's up in the air what its intensity is going to do, especially since it looks like models may be overestimating the shear it's in now. With that being said, speaking of models, it's time for us to start taking a deeper dive into what models are thinking about Gamma, where Gamma could go, and what we can expect. So let's take a look at the GFS. I know we've gone over this a little bit with Ethan, but let's take a look at what exactly happens here, because I think this is really interesting to note. You can see this stalling as this high-pressure system over the United States prevents movement north. Now, there is a possibility that meanders a little bit eastward as this does move on through. There is a little bit of a weakness towards Florida, but it's not big enough to cause any significant movement. And it's going to get shoved back south, so it's really pivotal on whether this moves east, meanders west, and then has that southward movement, because it could hit land again. And this could really change drastically what kinds of impacts to expect. For example, the GFS shows another landfall in the Yucatan from this, and it shows 92L beginning to develop as it gets towards Cuba. So that's an interesting solution, but if it moves and dodges the Yucatan, there's a possibility of re-strengthening once it stalls down there as well. I mean, there are a lot of different possibilities from this. I mean, if we look back a few runs here, you can see a 983 millibar system over there. So while consensus has shifted towards a weaker system, I think it's definitely something to note that we're going to have two systems possibly in the Gulf with conditions relatively favorable for some intensification of some sort. So it's definitely something to acknowledge. Moving on, this is another really interesting product. This is the basin-wide HWRF. And I want to take a look at this and see what Ethan and Ryan's thoughts are. But we can see here Gamma striking, right? And we can see it then heading back on south with weakening. But we see a tropical storm out of 92L. So that's a really interesting feature. And I'm wondering, what are the thoughts from the team on this HWRF solution? Because I definitely think it's a possibility. But I'm wondering, what do we think about the basin-wide HWRF's solution here? Alright, well, moving on from that, My thoughts on the basin-wide HWRF solution are that it's definitely a possibility. I think that, again, as Ethan said earlier, it's more likely than not that the system will weaken as it moves southward, but I'm still not ruling out the possibility of some re-strengthening, and 92L will probably develop right around this area in particular. That's what I would presume, near Cuba and the Yucatan. And the ship's rapid intensification guidance has shown a possibility of some pretty rapid intensification here. Leahy, what are your thoughts on that basin scale HWRF front?
It's an interesting run. I mean, they really do it with shearing of gamma, it looks like. They pretty much have it gone within like 5 days or so, which is very interesting to see with the HWRF in particular. It's not something you usually see with the HWRF. And then the 92L, you can see that kind of developing in the Gulf. So that is interesting. That's going to be something to watch over the next week or so as it really moves into the Western Caribbean and into the Gulf. It's still pretty uncertain exactly where it's going to go in the Gulf, but we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, certainly, for sure. Let's move on to some more model guidance here that we can see. This is Gamma's track guidance here generally, and it looks like we do have some pretty good agreement on a westward shift and then a southern shift into the southern Gulf of Mexico. So it looks like we have pretty good agreement on where the storm is going for most of these, with the HMON being the outlier solution here, interestingly enough, shoving it right back into the Yucatan. So what do we think of this track solution? I think it's pretty realistic. The NHC, you can see on that black line, following this track solution pretty closely.
Yeah, they're following the track solution, of Gamma. It's probably going to move to the west at some point into the Bay of Campeche. Interesting that there's been more southward movement with really most of the models there. That's interesting to see.
Yeah, that far south movement is definitely interesting. Ethan, what are your thoughts?
The southward movement on the HWRF is entirely possible, so I wouldn't rule that out. But as Gamma stalls along the coast, it might honestly make landfall along the northern coast. So that needs to be considered.
Yeah, and if it made landfall on the northern coast, I mean that's very rare. I can only think of, I think, one time that's even happened, and that was with Isidore in 2002. So if that does come to fruition, that would be a very interesting anomaly.
That is for sure. Looking at some more model guidance, the GEFS showing a much more chaotic spread as to the possibilities here. It looks like an absolute mess out here, and it looks like it shows beyond the 5-day point almost a northward shift, with some ensembles deepening the storm below 980 millibars. So those are outliers, but it's definitely something to note for sure to the team. I know that this is definitely it's a difficult to predict situation when you have a stalling system, but it looks like we have general consensus of a westward shift. Do we think that the GEFS could be onto something with this northward shift, or do we presume that it's going to die out as it heads into the southern Bay of Campeche, which, in my opinion, is the more likely solution?
That's what I think is the most likely situation, is Gamma dies out as it moves into unfavorable conditions in the Bay of Campeche and the southwestern Gulf of Mexico, and it'll probably be gone by the time that we reach the next weekend.
Yeah, I would have to agree with both of you there. I think most of the model consensus really has it shifting towards the south, into the Bay of Campeche, and then I guess really starting to fizzle out as it does so, as it experiences shear and dry air and stuff. So yeah, I think that, I mean, the The GFS, what they're saying, it is technically possible. I just don't see it happening.
Alright, with that being said, we're going to move on to some intensity guidance, which shows this possibly being a tropical storm within the next 5 days. I think something to note here is that we have anywhere from a tropical depression, which the HWRF, HMON, and GFS all show, to a Cat 2, which the EGRI model shows, and we have a near hurricane from some models towards the end of the forecast period as well. So quite uncertain on intensity guidance. I know we think it's going to die out, something to acknowledge. And we can see this uncertainty continue on here with our ship models, our statistical models also showing some uncertainty here. And I mean, statistically and dynamically, we have a lot of uncertainty with intensity. In our experimental late guidance runs showing a pretty tight consensus. We should not really look at the CHP6 here because that assumes there's no shear. There's definitely going to be shear with this system, but the rest of the CHP models in pretty close agreement that we're going to be seeing a high-end tropical storm in 5 days' time.
That is a significant change from earlier forecasts, and we'll have to see if the National Hurricane Center does indeed follow that.
We'll see. Again, these are the CHP models, which are looked at as kind of a guidance, with your minimum and maximum being the 6 and 7, and then your in-betweens, given certain conditions, being the rest of the CHP ensembles. Again, our dynamical consensus showing general weakening, but nothing below tropical storm status at the overall consensus, which is what the NHC is being careful about as well. Something else I want to talk about before we really open it up to questions. This is the MPI chart, and we can see there where Gamma's heading into in the Gulf of Mexico. The MPIs are pretty much where the sky is the limit. So there are some rumblings from models that the system could re-strengthen as it heads into the Gulf of Mexico. If it manages to do so, and if shear lowers, I think we could be looking at an extremely dangerous system. I don't know about you, but I definitely think that folks in the Bay of Campeche, despite what the current solution looks to be, should be keeping an eye on this. That's, to say the least, should at least be keeping an eye on it. To the team, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very uncertain situation, a very uncertain forecast. I mean, really, who knows exactly what Gamma is going to do, at least in terms of impacts for, in the western Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we don't know where it's going to go. We also don't know how, strong it's going to be, or if it's even going to get there. So it's just more of something to keep an eye on rather than to, prepare or panic for just yet. It's more just something that we'll just keep an eye on and, just stay tuned for more updates, So, yeah.
We definitely agree with that. And something else of concern, ships guidance, again, showing the possibility of 92L as it moves into these waters, intensifying rapidly with a 60% chance of a 75 mile per hour intensification phase in the span of, I believe it's 2 days. So it's definitely something of concern, to say the least. But now that we're done with really everything that we're discussing in a more formal manner, it's time to open it up to questions. So to all of you out there, what are your questions? What can we answer? What kind of information do you need to know? We'll see here, as I'm sure that we'll be getting plenty of questions in just a minute. While we do that, let's go back to the key messages for Gamma. I think the things to really hit home with it: slow movement, lots of rainfall expected, and again, you could get tropical storm force winds for a while. Here's an interesting question for all of you. Do we think that Gamma was a hurricane?
No.
I have not looked at it yet at all. There were hurricane warnings in effect for parts of the Yucatan. I wouldn't be surprised if it was at some point, but no.
I haven't seen any support both from the ground and from reconnaissance aircraft that support an intensity of 75 miles per hour landfall. So I think that 70 miles per hour was the perfect call.
I agree with that. I think 70
Alright.
miles per hour was perfectly reasonable given the evidence. We could have new evidence surface in the future that changes our minds, but for now we're thinking 70 miles per hour was the right call. Alright, next question. Can 92L pull a Wilma?
No.
Odds are
Um,
no. I mean, climatologically, it's in a similar spot in a similar time of year, and you have the conditions, the environment to do it. Will it do so? Extraordinarily unlikely.
If you're
Very
talking
unlikely.
about like Wilma going from like a Cat 1 to a Cat 5 overnight, no, that's
Yeah,
not
no.
going to happen. Rapid intensification, given the right conditions and everything goes well for it, yes, it's possible. Although I would think that it's somewhat unlikely.
That is true. Next question. This is one that Ryan, in particular, I think this will be in your wheelhouse. How much activity can we expect this October in the Atlantic?
Well, in terms of October, and I'll say this, definitely don't think it's going to be. I don't think we're going to have as many named storms as we did in September. Okay, that was a record amount of named storms. 10 named storms in 1 month. That has never happened before.
Well, let's hope we don't have 10 named storms in October.
No, we're not going to. I mean, we've already had one. We're probably going to have two soon. But the record, I believe, for the most active October, at least in terms of the most amount of storms formed, was 8. I believe that was 1950, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was. I think 1950 had a very active October, and the thing about October is that the storms, you're done with, your big Cape Verde storms. Okay, those usually start to shut down once you get into like October, pretty much, and you start to see more activity in like the Caribbean and the Gulf and in the Western Atlantic. And one of our team members has corrected me, saying that 1950 and 2010 had 8 named storms in October. So thank you, James. So yeah, the record is 8 named storms. But anyway, back to what I was saying, is that you're more likely to get storms in the western part of the basin. That's where all the land is. So the Caribbean and the Gulf are places to watch. The most interesting thing that I'll say right now is that out of all of the Cat 5s that have happened in the month of October, all of them, with one exception, that being Michael, were in the Caribbean. So I think that if you're looking for a powerful hurricane to happen through the remainder of this year, you're probably going to be looking at something later this month in the Western Caribbean, I would say, probably moving west through the Western Caribbean. Maybe northward, but who knows? It might not happen at all. It's a very good possibility. So, at least in terms of October, we're definitely not done with hurricane season yet. There's still a lot of potential left for 2020 to still crank out some activity, certainly. And then once you get towards November, you start to get, the activity really starts to quiet down until the official end of the Atlantic hurricane season on November 30th. And then usually after that, it's no more. So yeah, that's basically what to expect, I would say. I mean, it could still be very active. I think a lot of people on our team are still thinking that this October is going to be very active. So we'll have to just wait and see, though.
That we will. Let's take a look at a few other things. First of all, will this future storm that 92L is likely to become a major hurricane? Hard to say at this point. Statistical models saying that the ceiling for this system is very high. But as of now, I would say that is unlikely.
Honestly,
it's really too early to say. Go ahead, Ethan.
to be completely honest, even though that no models say this, it would not surprise me if 92L becomes a hurricane.
It's got the environment to do it.
It absolutely does. It's just really just a question of if the storm takes advantage of those favorable conditions and intensifies quite significantly.
For sure. Next question. If Gamma is able to live past the 5-day mark, do you think it could strengthen again and become a Gulf Coast threat or not? Well, I think it's
No.
certainly possible. I know that the most likely solution is that it will dissipate ultimately, but there have been some model runs that indicate that the storm could certainly re-strengthen and become a significant hurricane in the long range, so there is some uncertainty there. Right now, it's more likely the storm will dissipate, but in the event it doesn't, we could be looking at a significant Gulf threat. To the team, first of all, what do you think is going to happen? And second of all, what do we think the possible solutions are?
The most likely solution regarding Gamma is most likely it'll move northward and meander quite slowly over the next few days, and it'll probably dissipate out to sea, I bet, at this time. Leahy, what are your thoughts on that?
On which storm?
Gamma.
On Gamma.
Gamma? I mean, we've been talking about Gamma a lot, and I think I've made my thoughts pretty clear that it's probably going to turn to the west. I don't know if it will. I think it's more likely that it will move southward into the Bay of Campeche rather than to the north, like the GEFS is saying. And I mean, in terms of intensity, though, I don't know. I really don't know. But either way, if you're on if you're in southeastern Mexico, the northern, the Yucatan Peninsula, and then areas, I mean, along the coast of the Bay of Campeche, I mean, you should probably be keeping an eye on this. Either way, Gamma could easily, regardless of intensity, still be a big, rainfall event. So I would keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Moving on to the next question, do we think that the area of disturbance 1, which is 92L, will form? Do we think that the second area of disturbance will form? And do we think the remnants of Paulette could reform? And this same person has also asked, why is the remnants of Paulette still a thing? I don't know. You can ask Paulette. Paulette's just, it still has convection. It's a very well-defined low. So, definitely something to talk about, but I think Paulette's chances are virtually zero. But when it comes to 92L and our second disturbance out in the MDR, what are our thoughts?
The MDR storm, or the MDR area of interest, that's an interesting one. I don't see it developing. I really don't. It's only got 20%. Probably not going to do anything. Even if it does, it's not going to be interesting at all. No threats to land. Yeah, that's basically that one.
Ethan, what are your thoughts?
Regarding these three areas of interest, I should say, 92L probably going to develop into a tropical cyclone at some point. At this point, I would probably put its development area probably south of Cuba, to be honest. But regarding the disturbance number 2, the 20% area of interest in the main development region, that probably will not form due to strong upper level winds, known as wind shear in the atmosphere. And X Paulette, well, it can try, but it's not going to form. No models don't show anything happening out of that.
We should just scribble that out. Pretend it doesn't exist. Here, you know what? I'll just do us all a favor.
Thank you.
And just scribble that out. You won't be able to even see it. It looks like it's not there. That makes me feel a lot better. You can take a look at the satellite on the stream, and our remnants of Paulette just isn't there, so we don't have to worry about it. Alright. Next question. What do we think
now,
about...
Thomas, I've I just want to let you know that I have posted a brand new forecast cone on Gamma just now in the live room that we're in, and it's quite an interesting forecast. And just wanting to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that in just a second. I just want to talk about a couple more questions that people have. First things first, what is our thoughts on the intensity guidance of 92L? Let's take a look at that real quick and what current intensity guidance looks like. Not too many models with it yet, but we can see there that possibility of rapid intensification of 25 knots, which would bring it to a strong tropical storm in about a day's time if it were to form now. Statistical guidance bringing it to a Cat 2. So what are our thoughts on this? I mean, the ceiling for this is very high. So what do we think?
Anything's possible. Yeah, does indeed bear watching. When we were tracking Laura, initially models were dissipating it out to sea and keeping it rather weak in the Gulf of Mexico, and well, you know what happened with that. But what am I saying? This system will do the same thing? No, I'm absolutely not. But it bears it. The point is, models change over time, and it does indeed show that we need to watch and stay updated to what happens with the system, and stay tuned in case if it develops.
Yeah, for sure. With that being said, let's take a look. This will be the final thing that we do tonight. Let's take a look at your cone, Ethan. You have produced a cone here. And I can see your forecast here calling for some weakening in the next day before we do see some re-strengthening in the 72 to 96 hour area. And then after that, we see weakening begin again as this heads into the Bay of Campeche. So what was your thought process when making this cone, and where do you expect this storm to be even beyond that point?
First off, beyond the day 5 point, it'll probably meander in the Bay of Campeche and die out to sea. That is my expectation for the storm right now. Most models do keep it fairly weak, but models are all over the place with intensity on this thing. And I have decided to go, for once, believe it or not, rather conservative on this forecast, because most, towards the day 5 period and beyond, the HWRF, H1, and GFS completely kill the system. However, some models do take it up towards hurricane intensity. And I've gone right in the middle, I guess you could say, with that.
Yeah, it appears
And
so.
and I do think that 92L, unfortunately, will become the dominant feature, and its influence will weaken Gamma a little bit, hence the weakening down to 50 miles per hour towards the day 5 range. This cone will be going out on our social media outlets in a few minutes, so if you do miss it, you can check it out on our social media outlets there.
Alright, with that being said, we're about to end the stream. Something really cool that I do want to talk about real quick is that we do have a Discord server. You can actually find that down in the link in the description below. Feel free to join that if you haven't already, because in just a moment, right after this stream ends, myself, Ryan, and Ethan will all be in the public call to answer some of your questions over there, and to just have a nice good time there in the public call, just talking tropics, having a casual, nice conversation. We love interacting with the community, and I really think that it's going to be a nice call tonight. So if you would like to join us, please feel free to. But yeah, our team members, we really do enjoy interacting with the community. So again, that link is in the description below if you would like to do that. Alright, with all that being said, we are going to be taking off here in just a little bit. So, first of all, here are my final thoughts of the night. Gamma, I think this cone represents it quite well. It's going to be moving and meandering in the Gulf of Mexico and the Bay of Campeche over the next few days. It'll likely stall and move quite slowly, with some slow weakening occurring with time, maybe a little bit of re-strengthening there in the intermediate day 3 and day 4 periods before it does begin to weaken and probably die off, although again, we don't know that for sure. 92L, which is all the way over near Jamaica right now, we're expecting that to develop, and there is a fair chance that this does rapidly intensify given the conditions that it's going to be within. And then it could head into the Gulf of Mexico, and that could be an ugly situation, so we'll be having to take a look at that closely, hoping for the best, expecting the worst. That's the mentality to go into this with if you're in the Gulf of Mexico right now. As we could see anything from a weak tropical depression forming to a Category 2 plus. So anything along those lines, definitely a possibility. All right, to the team, what are your final thoughts?
Stay tuned to local outlets as Gamma progresses slowly off towards the northwest, and eventually will make that westward turn, probably. And just make sure that you are prepared for absolutely anything as the storm drops heavy amounts of rainfall. And regarding 92L, just keep watching it as the system develops and probably develops into a tropical cyclone this week.
All right, and Ryan, what are your final thoughts?
Stay safe as always. Be weather aware. Be aware of, the forecasts and, what your local officials are telling you in regards to, what to expect and what to do, because they know your area and your risks much better than we do. We're just kind of giving you the bigger picture. So, it's an uncertain situation. I get it. It sucks. You want answers. Unfortunately, they're not easy to get. So just stay tuned though, and be prepared for anything, and you'll be okay.
All right, with that being said, first of all, thank you to the chat who's being so supportive right now of us. We are glad that you think we're doing a good job. And with all that being said, we're going to be heading off the air here. We've already gone over a little bit on time. So again, thank you to all of you so much for watching. And again, we'll be on the Force 13 Discord server call here in just a little bit. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.
Where you can support our project even more by showing our colours, just like this shirt I'm wearing. Or if the weather gets a bit colder, maybe this hoodie as well, of course. And of course, they go in all kinds of different varying colours. Or even pillows. I love a good pillow fight. Or even these amazing hurricane-themed phone cases. Or how about a drink out of this Force 13 mug? So you can find the wonders of Force 13's merch store online at store.force13.com. Ah! Oh! Who did that? Making its infamous landfall, Hurricane Michael is still a Category 3 as it enters the state of Georgia.